Here are the writing tips you need to learn how to write guilds, coalitions, and factions the right way, and give substance to the plot of your story. Join me on the journey toward world building my own story, as well as providing you with all the writing tips you need to make your story and characters stand out from all the rest. What is up, you muffin munching muggles? Welcome to Fiction and Reality, where we help you, yes, you, become the most devilishly gifted human that you know you are and that you knew you always could be. Today we'll be focusing on creating factions within your story. You know, the central clashing groups that tend to be ideologically polar opposites and are forced to squabble up and throw their hands expeditiously until the other side is laid out or leaking. Think Akatsuki versus the Hidden Leaf Village. Think Phantom Troop versus the Hunters. The Alliance versus the Jaegerist. Aaron versus the World. We all know how that ended. What is a faction and why does your story need one? Talking Corleone and Barzini.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Could really go for some Italian right now. How deep is the beef? Talking Bloods and Crips, Sean. Pirates versus the world government. Luffy with the law clipped and loaded. What set are you banging?
Today I got time, cuz.
Think of a faction as an organized group linked and chained tightly together by binding ideologies and a shared sense of purpose for achieving a common goal. Think about the Straw Hat Pirates, where the goal is to, of course, set sail on adventures across the seas, each member of the crew in pursuit to achieve their own set goal, but rifting through the pirate world within this union in order to help Luffy become the Pirate King out of a shared sense of duty, camaraderie, and purpose. And in the process of this crusade, topple their own individual trials set before them and work towards fulfilling their own dreams. The function that two opposing factions serve within your story would be to attenuate the clashing of these ideological principles you want to display and simply manifest within some physical form. And to also be able to track whenever that wire of tension begins ripping at the seams, and that cup of clashing morals begins to runneth over. You want a way to drive your themes forward, manifest them in these factions, have them clash, and find your creative ingenuity somewhere in between, a unique framing of events that makes your plot stand out from all the rest. Alright, listen, we're going to do something different. I realize I have to make this channel palpable for you guys, but more importantly, palpable for me. Yes, palpable for me. Yes, I matter. If we're all not having fun, I'll make sure no one's having fun. Using our muffin munching head tops, we're going to aim to create a scenario to map the core elements of this video's subtopics while taking a look inside my high-functioning, high IQ brain. I don't even know if that made sense. Think of a pure blood race marked by silver hair and a royal bloodline versus a half pure blood race marked with black hair and a not so royal bloodline. Great, you have two factions, let's say the Silvers versus the Knicks, but you need something, some core element to glue each of them to their respective faction, some friction sown between them to induce conflict, and a common goal for each of them to cling to in order to deter abandoning that shared sense of purpose. Let's spice this scenario up, shall we? These two factions live in the Land of Shine. Now, why is it called the Land of Shine? Because I want it to be. I'm asking the questions here. Let's say there's ancient tales of entities named Minesweepers who wiped the entire architecture of history from both the Silvers and the Knicks. The Silvers live in luxury, contain the monarchy of the Land of Shine, and are walled off from the Knicks, who live in what can only be described as a hellscape of poverty, prejudice, and taxation without representation. Unlike the Silvers, who aren't taxed at all, but live off the stones that they force the Knicks to mine for them, to drive their economy forward. Now, due to the Minesweepers, no one knows how the disparity between these two became so vast. No one knows the history, no one knows the tale, but both harbor an ideology based simply on mirroring behavior displayed by their own kin. All they know is that the royals are born with silver hair, and that the plebeians are treated like trash due to their black hair. The factions you create in your story need a common goal to hold the bonds together. You see, factions cling tight within their own niche. The strongest bond being the need to survive or keeping the postulates that govern their world branded in the iron, so that power does not shift on its axis. Such as with our example, for the Silvers it would be keeping the Knicks walled off from the high society, and for the Knicks it would mean biding their time to launch a rebellion. Throughout history, if there's one thing we've learned and one thing you should take for your story building, the boundaries of the law will always be tested, the clutches of powers will always be bested, and it's all starts when someone is brave enough to say no, or even worse, take note of this, when someone gains the courage to ask why. Take Eren Yeager and the Jaegerists, for example. Their faction's cohesion wasn't built on shared kindness or mutual trust necessarily. It was cemented by desperation, nationalism, and a unified goal to crush the cycle of oppression and ensure Paradise would never kneel again. The Jaegerists clung tight to their ideology like iron shackles, convinced that only absolute domination could protect their future. Their enemies, former allies, who have now aligned with the foreign powers in the name of peace. See, both the Jaegers and the Lions had a vision of the world, but the true tension erupted because their definitions of freedom were incompatible. And that's the spark. Factions drive or fracture depending on how deeply they believe their survival hinges on their cause. Eren wasn't just fighting for the land, he was fighting for a worldview, and in doing so he rewrote the rules of loyalty, morality, and power. That's the kind of tension you want to inject into your own story when one group finally says no, the other dares ask why. Whoever that someone is that dares to question the complacency of the social structure, of course, is up to you to decide, and likely will be the character to shift the story off its axis and contour the tale in your own unique image. Heck, that someone might not even be a part of either group, but slot themselves in for some other unspoken motive. And slotting in your own creative ingenuity here is where the story goes from cold to hot, scorching, super hot fire. Whatever the course, you should be developing these goals with the reader in mind, gauging what side you want them to pick, if any at all, and understand that a common goal or desire is the glue that ties each faction member tightly to one another and moves them from action to unity. The faction you write in your story needs to stand for something, so give that faction a soul and identity, not just in the form of goals, but perhaps in a symbolic way as well. So what are you waiting for?
Fetch me their soul!
You saw how the Akatsuki were getting down with the black cloaks and the iced out rings. Show some decorum for Lord Jashin. Consider the aesthetics of your factions and symbols or colors that represent their cause, such as what a knight's crest is, to the red cloud sewn in the Akatsuki's cloak that symbolized the blood rain that fell in the hidden rain village during its many wars. A drawn-out vestige of Konan and Nagato's pain, an emblematic manifestation of a diffuse torment that befalls the members of the Akatsuki, either due to being outcast secondary to murderous rampage, or simply lost drifting on an unclear path of life. Consider how the name of your faction and individuals ultimately express the faction's values, and most critically, the underlying meaning behind them. While internal motives are vital, the surface level emblematic representation of that unity and the motives that breathe life into that faction's soul are just as important. In One Piece, Soldier King setting fire to the world government's flag only meant something because the flag meant something. And in the world's despondum, that flag was a representation of the world itself, but in the Straw Hats' case, a shackle that needed to be broken for Nico Robin to be free. You need to give your faction a soul to drive forward consistency, establish a standing for your movement. Do so and you unlock a variety of new ways to portray the clashing of morals through its external frame. Now, bidding off our example, let's say one of the black-haired Knicks finally is like, that's enough of the bullshit. No more eating mud cakes, no more pink sauce, no more Long John Silvers. It's time to rev up the band, call forward the troops, and lock in on the Silvers. Now we've got an all-out war between the Silvers and the Knicks, right? Now we got some good old revolution, and all of a sudden, a war raging between these two factions, and between all of that, someone asking why this is happening and what started it all, and searching for answers, searching to uncover the myth of the Minesweepers, the origin of this lost history. Let's say the symbol of rebellion of the Silvers is a flag branded with silver flames, and the symbol for the Knicks is a shattering piece of coal to represent their breakage from the bondage of being forced to mine prosperous stone that fuels the economy for the Silvers, and rather embrace an all-out revolution or rebellion. Cool, now both factions at some base level as a soul, and of course can be tuned up more than that. But we're not diving that deep. Your faction needs a hierarchy and power structure. In other words, you need to establish a framework for exactly who is going to be running the show. In other words, who is the boss?
Hey, boss.
Touching on Arcane, perhaps there isn't just one sole man running everything, such as Silco, who ran Zahn as the most feared authority out of all the Kim Barons. Perhaps rather than having a single person hold all the reins, one of the factions in your story is more council driven than anything. The mechanisms of hierarchy create grounds for internal power imbalances within each faction and room to spread a thick new layer of conflict, thus leaving you options to drive forward the plot in a variety of directions. Some layers of conflict, the air is a little more thicker than others. By creating a hierarchical system, you create grounds for characters to challenge the authority figure on the throne, breach the code of loyalty, depending on the decisions being made by that sole leader or the council of individuals. In the Land of Shine, with the Silvers and Knicks now clashing in an all-out war to the death, and somewhere in the middle, a foreign soul searching for the truth behind the Minesweepers and the history that was buried between the two factions, we have hierarchy. The Silvers take heed with a council of 20 of the top richest families, and the Knicks move forward with the supreme leader who leads this movement on a revolution. You know, there's a lot of talk about supreme leaders these days. Maybe we should give him a less controversial name. Top G or the Bottom G. Maybe we'll just settle for Nightwolf. Nightwolf. I like Nightwolf. Let's say suddenly the Knicks are getting mollywopped by the Silvers in one pivotal battle, and a core section of the rebellion is wiped out. Now internal fissures are sown within the ranks of the Knicks. Other opposition leaders begin preaching their philosophy, believing their way of leading is the true way to freedom from the Silvers' tyranny, and suddenly begin plotting like Drake's Ghost Riders. Suddenly the tea starts tasting a little bit funny and the lights start getting fuzzy and going out. Now what I'm trying to depict here is a shattering of ranks and the crumbling of loyalty, not from the shattering of a common goal, but a branching off of the means to achieve it. By consistently building upon the framing of these structures as we ascend the subtopics, I hope it opens up new angles for you all to tackle your own original stories in unique ways. So we have this internal fissure after the Knicks are crushed in this internal battle, and creative ingenuity lugging the gears of the plot forward in between. You need to think hard about who is a part of this hierarchy and what status they hold. Are they banded together with the faction's ideology, hyping up the boss? Are they railing against the faction's ideology and hating against the come-up? Or are they more obsessed with power of that structure rather than the cause itself? Snakes in the grass, if you will. When it comes to hierarchy, the question isn't just who holds the throne, but what that throne even means within your world, whether it's a singular iron-fisted force like Silco manipulating every corner of Zon from the shadows, or a fragmented tension-laced council of power-hungry voices clawing for dominance. Your faction needs a framework, not just of roles, but of motives, loyalties, and cracks beneath the surface. We're not picking sides this time. Hey, you may benefit from implementing a neutral faction between the two ideological clashing factions within your story. This is one of the most game-changing moves you could possibly make, in my opinion, and here's why. The neutral faction acts as a branch rifting between the other two clashing factions, but its motives could be driven solely by survivability, lack of the faction's ideological interests, or even serve as an additional barrier depending on how their neutrality aids or hurts one of the respective clashing factions. With respect to our living example between the tyrannical Silvers and the oppressed and rebellious Knicks clashing in this all-out war, suppose there lives another group between them who harbors fragments of history from the Minesweeper's voyage, and it's neither pure or half-blooded and cares not to take the side of either faction. Let's say the neutral nation is dubbed the Midbloods and the Knicks offers them a spot on their council that they'll create should they defeat the Silvers, and a percentage of the territory that they gain from the Silvers. Pressure is mounting, more of the Midbloods' land is becoming ravaged by the war in between the Silvers and the Knicks, and so they agree to push the Silvers out, but just far enough to hold them at bay, but not fully enough to commit to a full-scale offensive. Textbook example of an opportunistic relationship coming to life. Introducing a neutral group gives you the runway to spin your story in various directions, add heat to the circumstances depending on whether or not that neutrality remains neutral, or the vantage shifts on its axis, and they must break the sworn neutrality to pursue the best interests of the faction. Of course, what that looks like is entirely up to you. Typically, neutrality is never permanent. Pressure builds, lines shift, and sometimes survival demands a choice. Choosing a neutral group gives your narrative runway. You can spiral your story outward. Will the faction remain uninvolved? Will they be forced to intervene? Will betrayal arise from within? That decision and the moral weight behind it is yours to explore, because sometimes the group that swore to never pick a side ends up deciding the fate of the warring factions. If you took something from this video, I want you to take a moment to crack that subscribe button below and like the video. It pushes these videos out so that others can take key tokens that you gained. So do your fellow comrades a favor. The direction of progress is forward, and it's only up from here. I will leave a link to my socials in the description below. If you want more info on how to improve your story, feel free to check out some of my other videos by clicking right here. Writers, world builders, and storytellers aiming to perfect writing techniques and enhance their storytelling and world building are all welcome. And with that, remember, if ever you're lost in a forest, your words strip your mind from fantasy and look to the window of the world. And there, your mind will run free.